My name is Theresa Barron-McKeagney, and I'm with the University of Nebraska at Omaha School of Social Work, where I'm the director there. This year, I'm at Our Lady of the Lake University as a visiting professor. And this morning, I'm going to talk about family dynamics as we care for our loved ones who may need our support at this time. Because I'm a social worker, I see everything as being interrelated. Systems are interdependent upon each other. When I think of systems, I see families and families' interactions. I remember once hearing that it might be easier if we could choose our family members like we choose our friends. But we are born into our families, and they are part of us forever. With regard to family dynamics, what I'm describing today is through the lens of systems theory, and its focus on the interrelatedness of social phenomena. This particular theory focuses more on the dynamic interaction between systems, members, in this case our families, and less on individual behavior. A family member, as a social system, we can look to one another as a cause for our behavior, but in systems thinking, we are also affected by the systems outside the family, such as our communities, our friendships, our society. Through understanding the systems frameworks, we can understand more fully our options and opportunities for intervention with the challenges that we face. So some considerations that we should think about as we think about family dynamics. The family is a system with a unique structure and communication pattern. Perhaps some of us in our families understand those patterns very well with regard to communication. You know, it's like, okay, when Joey says something to Linda, what does that really mean? You know, when Linda says something to Susan, what does that really mean? And so we have our own communication within our family dynamics. We ask also ourselves, how open is the family and closed to other systems? Again, in systems theory, we think a system is open when it can receive information and input from other opportunities from other systems. We think of a system as being more closed when there's not an opportunity for that information to come into the family. How well does the family fit with the environment? You know, when we take a look at not only our households, but just our society as a whole, our communities, our neighborhoods, how well does our family fit in with what it's transpiring within the environment? How are family members socialized? You know, once again, previously we were talking about what the role is of ourselves in this family of origin. You know, are we seen as the one that takes care of everything? Are we seen as the one that lives someplace else? We never see so-and-so. You know, what is it that we do in our families, and how are we socialized into those roles? How are subsystems, hierarchies, and roles in the family created? Again, in systems theory, we talk about subsystems as being part of the whole system, but there are also pieces that function off of the system as a whole. So we call those subsystems. Hierarchies, you know, we all understand that sometimes we have this ladder of how things operate in families. And usually, you know, when our parents are intact, we think our mother and dads make the decisions for the families as we're younger. And as time goes further, we also think that they still have some power in the family to make some of those roles. And the roles that we create in our family. Again, who are we in this family? You know, are we seen as the one that takes care of everything? Are we seen as the one that leaves things alone? What are the roles that we have in our families? What are the patterns of interactions with family members, and how do we transfer information and resources within the family and within external systems? In terms of caregiving and in terms of operating with systems outside of the family, this is a very important question for us to understand. Is how do we function knowing what the information is out there that we need to be able to support our loved one with? How do we transfer that information? How do we communicate with those systems outside of the family? And how does the family deal with dysfunctional triangulation in communication? Now, what I mean by triangulation is that if you have a triangle and you have people that are operating in a full communicative mode, then that triangle is okay. When the triangle becomes dysfunctional, it means that two sides of the triangle are not communicating with one side of the triangle. And so it becomes dysfunctional. And you begin to see that there are opportunities for, let's say, person A and person B to start this alignment together that may not be good because person C then never gets to understand what that truly means. So it's dysfunctional because everybody's not in the loop with regard to the information. What are the specific cultural communication cues? Again, as we said earlier, that sometimes in Latino families, there is a strong value toward being interdependent upon one another, to making sure that the family comes first, to making sure that we are a part of our communities. And so there's a stressor on how well we function in the family as those individuals, and how well we function in community as well, because the community is such a value to us too. The last thing we think about in terms of the considerations about family dynamics, how responsive is family to stress? And perhaps we never really know that until a family member becomes someone that we need to take care of. Because if you come from a small family or a large family, or you're an only child, it means that there's going to be some stress that has an opportunity to show itself when things start to change in the family. Consider that, our parents perhaps, or our significant others who take care of us as we're being raised, think there's nothing that we'll ever think about in terms of their needs, because they'll always be this way. But as you grow older and your needs change, the people that have raised us, their needs also change. But in our minds, we always see them as these very functional, perhaps young, middle-aged adults that have taken care of us. But then we get to see the change in terms of whatever it is that's happening medically with them that we have to attend to. In terms of, again, because I'm a social worker, we think also of assessment. And so in social work assessment, we try to identify how a family structure and communication patterns contribute to three things: entropy, synergy, or achieving a steady state. Entropy means that when a system closes off to another system, it suffocates itself. It's sort of like we talked about the body in terms of the physical response to shutting down. A muscle's not used frequently anymore. And so it interfices. It just doesn't get used. We've heard that thing about, we use our brain or we lose our brain. We have to function as though we're always using the muscles that we have. Otherwise, they entropy. They don't work for us anymore. Synergy is just the opposite. The system is open to opportunities, so it thrives. And when I think of synergy, I think, all things are kind of moving together in tandem, and everything is making a very nice interrelated point. A steady state is just that, a system that is in balance. So when I think about these terms, I always see the image of fire, because the match is lit and a candle burns. In entropy, I think about a lid that's put over the candle so the fire dies out. It cannot use its environment anymore to continue to burn. In synergy, you have an open fire and it burns because it has the air to breathe in. In a steady state, you think about adding the wood to the fire so it continues to burn. And being here in Texas, I never realized I would have to have a fire. I live in an apartment, and I see a fireplace, and I'm thinking, what in the world do I need a fireplace for? Because I'm in Texas. I'm in South Texas. Well, having spent December and January here, when you all had some pretty cold weather, I realized then that your cold weather means something different than my cold weather back in Iowa and Nebraska. And so this is how I feel about understanding entropy and synergy and steady state. In social work, we help the family system decrease stress and move to a new level of adaptation by possibly restructuring roles and hierarchies. So each family has a unique structure, a pattern of stable relationships among family system members, and is based on the function that each person carries out. Sometimes seeing the family as a system gives us sight to see the whole as being greater than the sum of its parts. And I think that you have all heard that, is that if we take things apart, they are not as strong as when they're together. That's why it's so important for us to function sometimes as a whole versus the parts. For some people, using metaphors and imagery can help identify how one is feeling in the family when you're feeling overwhelmed by the caregiving, perhaps, burden. With this identification, we can help clarify what your needs are. I have a colleague who says, I'm just buried. I'm just buried. That means that she's overwhelmed with all the responsibilities she has. And what I would ask as a therapist or as someone who is helping her, what will it take to get you above ground? If you're feeling buried, what is it that we can do to make you feel that you're not being buried anymore? So the use of imagery and metaphor, I believe, is very important for us as we think about how we're feeling and how that's translating to other people. Older adults in the family. The United States has more elderly people today than ever before. There are currently more than 36.3 million people 65 years of age and over, making up 12% of the population. More than half of the elderly live in 9 states, one of them being Texas. For people 75 and over, they comprise one of the most rapidly growing groups, and those aged 85 and over has the greatest increase of all. More and more families are taking on the many challenges of caregiving for older family members. Some studies have found that nearly 1 in every 4 people is providing care for a relative or friend aged 50 years and older. Caregiving, despite its rewards, often takes a physical, emotional, and financial toll on caregivers. In some cases, the caregivers themselves have health concerns and may lack their own support system, which could lead to isolation and depression. About 13% of elderly people live with their children, siblings, or other relatives. What is important then to understand regarding our changing roles and relationships with people in our families? When I was young, I didn't see my parents as older adults. Even though according to 1960s standards, they were in their 60s, so they were older adults. I also didn't think as a young adult that my parents would need assistance when they turned 70s and 80s. I'm the youngest of 11 children. My parents were immigrants from Mexico. There were 2 boys and 9 girls. The firstborn dying when she was only 7 months old, and my mother was only 16. But life with her parents were not an easy one. My grandmother was homesick when they came over from Mexico, and they wanted to go back. My grandmother wanted to go back, but my grandfather wasn't ready to go back. So again, in terms of family relationships, family secrets, family understanding, why we're motivated by the behavior that we have is a short story. We could never confirm with my mother, but we did hear information from our aunt and then from our cousins that our grandmother committed suicide. And so what happened was my mother would say, your grandmother went to the hospital, she was sick, and I never saw her again. So my mother at this time, 11, 12 years old, I thought would know, if something happened to my grandmother in such a tragic case. But what I came to realize was that it was such a tragedy for her that she blocked the memory of that happening. And so what she realized was that, no, my mother went to the hospital because she was sick. And that's what the story was. And so why it's important for us as a family is because if there were issues then with regard to mental health care indicators, we needed to know that as a family. Just as we need to know if there are depressions in our family, we need to know. Just as we would with any other health care issue, diabetes, heart problems, lung issues. So on the other side of things, in terms of the emotional side of things, I think it's very difficult for us in our country to talk about depression, suicide, some of the bipolar issues that we hear more and more about, anxiety, panic attacks, which is really does us all a disfavor as we care for people in our family, because we have to know what those triggers are for our own benefit. And so throughout her life then, my poor mother was dealing with some of these episodes of I think, feeling loss, feeling abandonment. And so her children were brought even more closer to her And so she was very vigilant over her children. And again, in terms of having an opportunity to be coaxed and to say this is something I need to do on my own, there was always that hypervigilance from my mom because she didn't want to lose any of us. Another quick story. My mother and dad, again, being more traditional, my mother especially loved to talk about death when she was younger. And, she'd use it in a humorous way, sort of like the calaveras that we think about when we go shopping. I see the skeletons, and I love the skeletons, and I think that's Mom coming through me, right? So what's happening is that Mom and Dad are having a conversation at their kitchen table, and I'm there. I'm in the middle, so I remember that focus. And my mother starts talking about, dying. And she said, Teresa, have you gotten your plot in St. Joseph Cemetery in Council Bluffs yet? Because they're going fast, So where will you be buried? I mean, I'm thinking, Mom, I'm not thinking about death right now. And my dad is like, oh, stop it. Stop talking like that, Don't talk about that. And so, he then leaves the table. He just doesn't want to hear it. And my mother says, I'm really worried about this. And I said, well, Mom, we'll check. We'll check it out. And I said, but, we may not be able to be very close to you because it might be that, everybody is there already. So she said, hey, she goes, I have an idea. I said, what's that? Because my mother and dad have their plots, and my sister, again, who I spoke of earlier, who has some developmental challenges, is buried right in between them. And so she said, I know. She goes, when you pass away, you be buried on top of me. She said, so that we're together forever. And I said, oh, Mom, that was such a sweet thought in a different way. And I'm thinking, that's my mother. I'm her youngest. I'm her baby. She never wants to be without me. And I said, but Mom, what will happen to Don? Don is my husband. And Mom thought, and she said, you know what? He can be buried on top of Euphemia, who's my sister. So once again, some of these things that are stories from our family members really can give us insight into what's happening with them. But it also then triggers from us, what is it that the responses that we have to that trigger? Because, when I heard my mother say, you'll never leave me, that was something that I understood happened when she was a young girl. Her mother left her. Her mother abandoned her. And so Mom felt, that she needed to make sure all the ties were there and nothing was ever going to leave her again. So those are the things we have to think about. When I assess my own family's personalities, I cannot see what others see because I'm part of my family's system. Do not operate on a family member. When we say we can't see the forest through the trees, it's because we're part of this family system. We're part of the dynamic. And when I understand and perceive then what my role has been in the family and what my responses have been to our crisis in the family, sometimes I have to rely upon others to give me that feedback and insight because it's very difficult. So I just wanted to chat with you a little bit about my family. Again, my oldest sister, Amparo, unfortunately died when she was just a baby. And so we never understood what Amparo would be or what she was to become in the family. My next sister, Ramona, was really sort of the person that led the family. She was the one that my mother and father depended upon a lot to get things done. Because my mother suffered from rheumatism early in her days as a young mother, she couldn't really leave the house very often. So when it was time to go to the store, and other sisters had been born, and my father was working, she needed to send my oldest sister, Ramona, out to the grocery store. And so there was a story that, Mom would call a cab, have a list for Ramona, send the cab to the grocery store, get the groceries, and come back. You might think, well, here's your sister, maybe 12, maybe 11. My sister was 8 years old. And so, once again, we think, wow, how did that happen? Well, you can imagine that what my sister Ramona did in terms of growing up always in this leadership capacity, right? And so Ramona eventually went to nursing school and left the family. She said, I need to get away from, Council Bluffs and Omaha. And what she did was she put a bandana around her eyes, turned herself around so she was dizzy, had a big map of the United States, and just put a pin down. And wherever it was, that's where she went. So Ramona ended up in New Mexico. And I thought that was always pretty cool, that she went to a state where, she could identify with the culture. Because she could have ended up in North Dakota or something. Not saying anything against our visitors who are from North Dakota, but so that's what happened with Ramona. Well, then my next sisters kind of, knew that they may not have been able to live up to everything that Ramona represented in the family. And so there were a lot of different things that happened in terms of my next round of sisters, in terms of, and sometimes we talk about this with regard to family roles as being heroes. Sometimes as families who have people that are mascots in the family. And what that means is that, people are the cheerleaders in the family. They never want anything to go wrong. They want to always kind of make sure that things are right. They don't like a lot of conflict. They use a lot of humor. And then there are people that are called the scapegoats in the family. Sometimes you go out and test the boundaries a lot and then get in trouble a lot, And I'm not saying this is a bad role, but you can understand in my family, this kind of repeated itself over and over and over again. And then there are people in the family that are quiet, that you would really never know that they were around because they're so quiet. And so as we think about some of the roles in our families, I want you to consider, what kind of role am I in the family if I'm using some of those images? And in my family of origin, again, I think that probably I identify most with being a hero in the family because a lot of my family give me a lot of things to take care of. And I take care of them. I feel very supported by that role because of things that I've done. And so right now, being in the School of Social Work also lends me to that role. So there are a lot of things that we create that help us function in that role. I think sometimes it'd be fun to be the scapegoat. I would love to kind of rile up the trouble and to say, I didn't know that that's what I was doing. It doesn't happen a lot, though, unfortunately. Another issue, when my mother then came to live with us the last 6 months of her life in hospice, my family then had some very, I think, strong unspoken sentiments. And again, I want you to consider what we discussed earlier in regard to communication patterns and how well we really talk with each other about some of these things before an event happens, which causes us to be very stressed. So my mother there, they were trying to get her to function again because she had lost a lot of motion on her left side. In the last year of her life, she was hospitalized 5 times. And so we knew, that the end probably was coming near. A physician had asked to place a pacemaker in my mother's heart. And again, my mother was 88 years old. And for years she had said, I just want to go. I want to join your father. I want to see my baby. Just let me go. Just let me go. And so I knew that in terms of my mother's wishes, that was something that she did not want to do. So at that point, the physicians were saying, we need to be able to place her then in some kind of rehabilitative care. And so there was a nursing home just right up the street from where I live, and we worked hard to get her placed there so she could have an opportunity to rehabilitate. Well, her body had struggled so much over the past year and was just not strong anymore. So Mom was in nursing home care for roughly 3 weeks, and I saw the depression start to set in with regard to, I don't want to be here. I really don't want to be here. So we as a family started thinking about what are the opportunities, to take Mom home, to do this, to do that. Well, because we knew that our sister, who had taken care of our mother for so long, would be unable to take care of her now, we thought about moving Mom into my home. That's when there was a struggle with regard to how were we going to do that. Because we care about you, Theresa. We don't want you to feel overwhelmed. But then I had a deep need to try and do this. And so the hospice folks gathered us in my home to basically speak to my family members about moving my mother into hospice in my home. Again, as a large family, you would think that probably happened a lot, where we get together and function as a family to talk about things. Well, of course. But that happened around holidays and joyful situations, marriages, births of children. So the time when we did that was the communication style we owned, which is we're all happy. Everything's good. This wasn't a happy moment. And so we could see other patterns start to emerge then. And so it was agreed upon that Mom would come and live with us in hospice. And my family, really started coming around in terms of we need to be with our mother. We need to come and do what we needed to do. But I think it was with some struggle that they operated on that. Because, again, as we spoke earlier, we always imagine our family members, our parents, or our folks that take care of us, our grandparents, as just kind of passing away slowly into the night. And hopefully in their homes, if not that, perhaps a hospital, but never perhaps. So that was a dynamic that we had to deal with. So in terms of closing, I'd like for you to consider these last questions. Are your family members closely aligned with one another? And what that means is, do you have communication where it brings you close together, where you can say, I understand this, I appreciate that, I respect this? Are family members dependable in times of uncertainty and crisis? Do you feel that you can go to your family members when you have these questions that you are uncertain about? What are their responses in times of crises? And again, let's reflect on those family roles that I discussed earlier to give us some perspective on what we can do. System theory helps us understand the interactional impact of individuals at different stages in the life cycle and their reciprocal effect on one another over time. So, things to keep in mind is that our family occupies positions that are states of interdependency. A change in the position and status or behavior of one person or one member leads to the change in the behavior of another person. The family is a boundary-maintaining unit with varying degrees of rigidity and permeability in defining family and in our non-family world. Family composition composes families different culture to culture. Moreover, the shifts in our family composition can be identified at different points in our life cycles. The family is an adaptive and equilibrium-seeking unit with patterns of interaction repeating themselves over time. The family is a task-performing unit that meets both the requirements of external agencies, representing society, and also the internal needs and demands of its members. Reciprocity between individual and social needs is known as a socialization of family members. So as I said, everybody sees their caretakers in the family as probably being heroes. So I want all of you to know that that's a role that's sometimes a great role to have, and other times a very burdensome role. Because we need to make sure that our other family members or people that will support us know that we can't always be the heroes, that we need to reach out and be supported by them, and that it is okay to ask. It is okay to say, this is getting difficult for me, and I need your support. That's hopefully what we'll do as we go toward more of a healthy relationship with the people that we're taking care of, and have healthy people in our families will help take care of us. So thank you very much. I appreciate your attention.